The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 1, The Fall. Chapter 22. The tail missed them by a stretch, but they were struck with so many chunks of snow and ice that for a second Tal thought he had been hit and killed. It took a while to sink in that he was still alive. Milla helped him up, and they staggered off, the Ice-Carl girl leading. Selsky kept thundering past behind them, but none so close. It took them half an hour to walk far enough away to be able to talk, and for Milla to consider them safe from Selsky, who might be on the edges of the horde. She took off her pack and sat on it. Tal also sat, trusting his thick furs to keep the chill of the ice off his backside for a while. "We have crossed the living sea," said Milla proudly, almost to herself. She didn't seem at all concerned about the loss of the sleigh and the Reska, who had long since disappeared into the eternal night. Something in her voice made Tal ask her a question. "You haven't crossed it before?" "No." Milla slid off her face mask and smiled, though not at Tal particularly. "We do not cross the living sea except in times of direst need. They will sing a story of our crossing when I return." "Great," said Tal bitterly. "I thought you did it all the time. I would never have agreed—" He stopped as he saw that Milla wasn't even listening. She was completely crazy, and so were all the Ice-Carls. The sooner he was back in the castle, the better. Even Great-Uncle Ebbet wasn't as mad as Milla. He looked out into the darkness. The paltry light of the moths in the lantern were barely enough to see Milla's face, and his shadow guard was almost invisible. Beyond that was absolute blackness. Once again, Tal had to fight a desire to lift his sunstone up and call all the light he could. There could be anything out there, lurking in the dark. "You can rest for a while, then we'll go on," Milla said. "I will keep watch. It will take us longer without the sleigh." "Obviously," grumbled Tal. He could already feel the chill of the ice coming through his furs. How was he supposed to rest? But somehow he did fall asleep. When he woke, feeling cold and very stiff, Milla was preparing food. She had placed a bone dish on the ice, filled with oil of some kind, and was striking sparks with two small pieces of a dull silver metal over it. After a few tries, the sparks lit the oil. Milla then took a three-legged stand of bone from her pack, set it above the burning oil, and put a small pot on the stand. From the smell, Tal knew she was cooking more Selsky meat. "How do you hunt the Selsky?" he asked, as he got up and stamped his feet and clapped his hands to revive his circulation. The air around his chest, neck, and face was surprisingly warm, and his sunstone felt almost hot against his chest. He must have unconsciously drawn upon its power while he was asleep. "They seem too big and too dangerous." "We take the old and the slow," replied Milla. "On the fringes of the living sea, the ones that the Kalaquai have begun to eat. Even so, it is dangerous, and it can take 20 or 30 hunters many, many stretches to bring one to a stop." "What happens then?" asked Tal. It was all so strange and mysterious, this world outside the castle. A world none of the Chosen knew anything about. Or at least Tal didn't think they did. Surely he would have heard of the Ice-Carls, the Selsky, and the Merwin. "They die," Milla said with a shrug. "If the Selsky stop, they die. Here, you eat first." "Are we going to eat with the same spoon?" Tal asked, disgusted. She was so crude. "You can go hungry instead and die," Milla snarled. Tal saw some of the old hatred flare up in her eyes, but she quickly looked away and began to spoon up chunks of warm Selsky meat. When she was about halfway through, hunger overcame Tal's objections. He made a tentative reach for the pot. Without speaking, Milla handed him the spoon. That marked how they got on for the next 7 days. Or at least Tal thought it was 7 days. He could tell the time in the castle from his sunstone, but that only gave him hours. Sometimes he lost track. All the days were the same anyway. They walked and walked and walked. Sometimes up icy hills, sometimes down, sometimes on the flat. Milla rarely spoke except to give Tal orders. Every few hours they stopped to eat, or take turns to rest, or go to the toilet. Toilet stops were a dangerous activity in the cold and dark. With only the one lantern, Tal had to use his sunstone when he wandered off a little to take care of his needs, and call extra warmth from it to keep essential parts of him unfrozen. He didn't know how Milla managed. Presumably ice carls had their ways. Tal was just returning from such an excursion when Milla came bounding toward him. Her green moth lamp shuddered so its light only shone in front of her. "Hide your light!" Milla commanded. She pulled at Tal's arm to make him crouch down. Tal quickly focused on his sunstone, dimmed its light, and slipped the chain back under his coat. "What is it?" he whispered. "Merwin," Milla whispered back. "A big one. It was on our trail, but I have thrown Selsky meat to lure it aside. We must move away from here as quietly as we can, with as little light as possible." Tal remembered Milla telling him back on the ship about the Merwin. It seemed like years ago. "Hold on to my belt," Milla murmured. Tal gripped it, and they started off slowly. Milla shuttered the lantern down still more, pulling the handle at its base that closed the weave. Tal could hardly see it all, but somehow it didn't bother him half as much as it would have even a few days before. He was getting used to the dark. And, he had to admit, he'd kind of gotten used to Milla, since she obviously did take the blood ritual thing seriously and would do her best to get him safely to the castle. That was a huge improvement to when she just wanted to kill him. Not that she was anything more than the descendant of an escaped underfolk or something. Milla suddenly stopped. Tal almost ran into her. They both stood there silently, in the dark. They could hear each other breathing, cold rasps coming through their masks, no matter how quiet they tried to be. Tal could sense Milla staring out at something, but it was too dark for him to see which way she was looking. He moved his own gaze slowly, looking for anything that stood out in the darkness. When he did see something, it took him a second to remember what it must be. A long, thin light of surprising brightness that seemed to be moving by itself, slowly meandering from side to side. A Merwin's horn.